Today, we're here in honor of the digital wellness revolution. We know that the average teen in America will spend 30 years of their life behind a device. But screens aren't going anywhere. Common Sense's recent census report shared that 1 in 3 kids is using AI for learning. AI is changing faster than the human brain. But what do we do about it? Today, I'm here with 2 leaders that are setting the standard for the world, because we have 2 choices, one to lead through fear and the other through hope. So Bill, I'd love to start with you. Most teens tell us that they don't think social media platforms have their backs. But we know that at Half the Story, many of our teens look at Pinterest as a place for inspiration. Not all screen time is created equal. Many leaders in big tech are not making the decisions to empower and support our young people, but Pinterest is, while also navigating growth objectives that you have. What is the opportunity cost, and why is Pinterest willing to take it?
Thanks for the question. And I actually think it's quite a profound question that, saying like, it shouldn't have to be a question of like, how can it be good for your business to do good things for your customers or users? Like, wait a minute, like, shouldn't these things go together? And I think actually starting with like a really simple first principle like that, it sort of led to some of the things that we did very intentionally that have led to a resurgence of Gen Z on our platform. Gen Z is now more than 40% of our platform, our largest, fastest growing demographic. But the way we got there was actually by investing deeply in things that we thought would be better for their well-being, that would be better for their ability to have a safe space. And so some specific things that we thought about with that was like, one, how do we invest more in intention over attention? So much of the products out there were being tuned to maximize your time glued to a screen versus saying like, well, how do we actually maximize helping people get something done and maybe get something done in the real world? And then we also thought about how do we make it so that it can be not just time spent, but time well spent, and in a way that was safer. And so we did things like we're still the only platform that has done private only for under 16. Not private by default, private only. And when we did that, you asked about the question of how do we balance the business trade-offs. We did it because we felt it was the right thing to do for our users. And we just, the fundamental premise of like, if we do the right thing for our users, ultimately that will be good for our business. But I think there is a sort of short-termism that has been in the space. And when we announced that we were doing that, I think people thought it was going to really harm our user growth. And when we announced it, our stock dropped 20% from doing that. A year later, not only had we recovered all of that, we had nearly doubled because that actually became one of the primary reasons Gen Z was coming to our platform. And if you ask Gen Z, why do you go to Pinterest? They'll say they see it as an oasis away from the toxicity they experience elsewhere. So we made it so that that could be a space for them, that they didn't have to be in a comparative, performative environment, that they knew they weren't going to have strangers contacting them online. There was a space where they could just figure themselves out versus being told who they should be. They felt better and wanted to be there more. But in the short term, that's not what people thought would happen. But we just started with the premise of like, we really think this is the right thing to do for our users. And if we do that now, that will pay out in the long term. And ultimately, that's what's happened.
Well, ultimately, trust is the ultimate treasure. And you all can tell that case study to the world. And hopefully, we can get a few others down the street to follow your lead. Next, I'd love to address this question to the first partner. So there is a bit of synergy here. One is that Pinterest has been core to our work and was one of our first believers. And I can tell you that we wouldn't be doing the work at Half the Story without being one of your partners. But I also have the great honor of working with the First Partners team on the Children's Health Advisory. And this summer, we brought many of your youth to Pinterest, to the Capitol, to actually share their ideas in the platform and policies. And all of us are able to work together to use our platforms to empower the next generation. Now, the First Partner, I know that you've been all over the world learning and experiencing and understanding and really trying to understand how can we make California the leader in this space. What are some of the stories that you're hearing from young people, and what are you doing about it?
Well, I don't have to go very far to hear stories because I have 4 kids at home whose behavior I witness daily, both positive and negative when it comes to technology use. Obviously, California is committed to righting the ship and leading to the best of our ability. And I'm extremely proud of our age-appropriate design code that was signed into law a few years back, most recently the Phone-Free School Act. In addition, the Social Media Act, it doesn't really have a name, but Senator Stern's bill, ensuring that kids are not on social media in school just as they shouldn't be on their phones, and requiring that all the school districts, charter schools, et cetera, have a policy in the very near future. And we've seen that. I was at a phone-free school in Santa Barbara and witnessed the benefit of phone-free school policy. Children are more engaged in relationship in person, they're happier, they're thriving, there's less anxiety, better grades, better academic performance, just more of a community feeling, less cyberbullying, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that the benefits are tremendous. But I will say just at home that this is a very, very challenging problem. My youngest is 9. Then I have an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 15-year-old, so I'm in the thick of it. We waited until my eldest was 14. I wished I waited till she was 16. Early on, like many parents, and I know this is the story of so many parents, they get around all of your controls. The beauty is that we have so many conversations at home that they really understand the dark side, the downside. But I even see with my little, just turned 9-year-old, consuming sports because he loves soccer and basketball. And I've said this before, I think, in front of this audience, but I saw it first with my then 12-year-old, now 13-year-old, but now I'm already seeing it with my 8 and 9-year-old, that the sports culture online is also a gateway. It's almost like a gateway drug to the dark web and the dangers of a hyper toxic masculine alt-right culture that starts to spread these little messages about ultimately what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a man. So that's something that I really caution. And then, of course, having 2 girls, I wasn't trying on makeup. I wasn't going to Sephora. I wasn't wearing makeup at all in grade school and high school. I wasn't wearing lip gloss. I was not consumed or concerned with any of this. I didn't know how to do my hair. I didn't care. I was outside in nature playing. And so I share that because the pressures that we put on young girls in particular, just as we put different pressures on young boys, are so alarming to me that we have to wake up. And so that is, I think, because this is not just professional, but it's also personal, we're in this fight for the long run. Because we know that, again, this isn't a really, and again, I share little tidbits about my own family, and I won't get too specific here, but I see it with all of these young kids, and my heart goes out to both of them. And really, I think the boy crisis going on in our country, and I've made documentaries about it, just as I have the girl crisis, it's been worsened by these algorithms and the addictive nature of these platforms. And so we have to do something now. And so I commend you as a partner in this work. And again, we need more folks to come on in and join the fight.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I'm sure many of you in the audience have seen Adolescence, which is such a timely commentary on the struggles that young boys are facing. And we know that kids are getting technology younger and younger. 1 in 4 8-year-olds has a cell phone. But the antithesis of apathy is inspiration, and it is action. And at Half the Story, what we've been focused on after starting this, after almost losing my own life to technology 10 years ago, what we've realized is that when young people are at the center of education and of solutions, that you can really change the world, and that it starts with just one story. And because of your support, we've been able to work with young kids to educate other kids, and 70% of our students that go through our programs feel more empowered and more control of their relationships online. One of the things that I'm very excited about, and this is parlaying us to the phone-free schools conversation, which I'm sure a lot of you are very excited to hear about today. But one of the things that we're thinking a lot about at Half the Story is, how do we not make this feel like such a deficit? How do we not make it feel like abstinence? Because we all know that when we can't really scare kids into action when we're talking about that long-term change. And one of the things that one of our collective youth is working on is a phone-free school campaign for prom. So teens are actually hosting screen-free proms that Half the Story is powering. They came to us with this idea, and we're all working together to make it happen. Now, that is really where the magic happens. Earlier this year at Davos, you took the position of advocating for phone-free schools. Now, what I want to say is that tech is nuanced. It is a social determinant of public health. And what I mean by that is that all of us are probably here today because we had access to internet and we knew that this was happening. For many kids in America, which we know from Common Sense's research and Half the Story's research, when they're coming from lower income households, they're more likely to be spending more time online because they don't have active caregivers. And they're also suffering more from the negative impacts of technology. And so, Bill, what I'd love to hear from you is, one, why did you decide to take this stance? And can you also talk a little bit about iPads? Because even in the Bay Area, I'm going into these schools, I'm seeing people take phones away and then forcing kids to be on the iPads. And I feel like that's a whole other part of this conversation that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important issue. It's why we've spoken out on it and also worked with others like First Partner Newsom and Governor Newsom. We've reached out to governors across the country that are thinking about phone-free schools on both sides of the aisle. And I think it's interestingly one of the few things out there that there's pretty good bipartisan support for, both that as well as the need to address the youth mental health crisis and youth online safety. And so we talk a lot about distraction-free schools. And so, yes, phone-free is a part of that. But I think, broadly speaking, I think educators, parents, communities need to be, more in charge of what technology is adding to the equation in education versus when it may be taking away. And there are lots of great uses for technology in the classroom, several of which you pointed out. But being in control of when it is additive to that versus when it's not, I think is the core question. And so, but we think this is the definition of a collective action problem, right? That there's no one answer to all of this. So just phone-free schools, I think, doesn't answer the whole issue. You need tech platforms to step up and do their part. For example, I talked about how we've done private only for under 16. Well, we're also, we've talked about this, we're going to be putting out for users that are of school age. If we see them open our app during school hours, we're actually going to give them a prompt that says, please come back after school hours. And oh, by the way, here's a link to go turn off all the notifications on your phone. And so I think it's, for phone-free schools, empowering, educators and community leaders, because it does make such a huge difference for the kids to be able to focus on their learning, but also saying that, we support those initiatives, but we're going to do as much as we can as well, like saying, oh, we're going to tell you just come back and see us later, and give them a way to go turn off notifications so they're not distracted. And so I think these are the kinds of things that you need to see more from tech platforms. We've also advocated for age verification at the operating system level so that you can have better accountability for social media apps, for just apps across the phone to be able to provide age-appropriate experiences. And I wrote an opinion piece on this as well. The technology exists to do this, right? The technology is there. It is entirely possible to have the age set at the operating system level and available to apps in a privacy-safe way. Don't need to know exactly how old you are, but if you tell us that you're a minor, okay, we can deliver a different experience. And so we're collecting that on our own, but having better controls for parents, making it easier for parents and educators to simply parse when the technology is helpful and when it's not, I think will go a long way. And there are examples of both. For us, for example, we have 5 million plus boards on Pinterest, and that's one of our fastest growing areas that are around educational plans for teachers and things like that. But we just need to give people better ability to parse these things.
Well, I love that you said that. And we often say the opportunity cost of screens are really your dreams, especially for kids that will be spending 30 years of their lives, which is how old I am. So I represent how much time they might be behind a device, which is a little bit scary. And I cannot tell you how many college inspiration boards I have seen from our teens sharing how they want to decorate their room and all the things that they want to do. And we spend so much time talking about screen time, but what we've learned is that you have to really swap screens for something that actually engages your senses, whether that's play, joy, music. And I think that Pinterest does that in a way that other platforms don't. And that's really built into the infrastructure that you have.
And I think there's maybe a shift happening here where I think for the last 15 years, you had most of the biggest consumer technology apps really focus on how to maximize your time spent. And it was the attention economy. I think we are at a moment here where it's not just us. You have with the advent of AI, there's things to worry about in terms of how you make sure the AI is helpful versus harmful. But I think you have a moment here where you can shift back to an intention economy where the technology is actually working for you and helping you get something done versus just trying to keep you glued to a screen to maximize your view time. And I think, while there's lots of that happening too, there's a chance to shift that moment here.
It's so important. I mean, think about the pie of how we spend our time. I still think that tech and tech in school should only be a small portion in that, think about the Waldorf model or Montessori. Like, kids glean so much from using their fingers and their hands and writing. And there's so much that also just think about just your nervous systems of how technology can kind of speed up your nervous system. So I think that we need to create a little more balance, and I appreciate that. And also a reminder, especially for our kids who are online, that they're exposed to a consumer culture that they don't have money for. Like, the one message my son, who's 13, has really gotten from, sadly, the sort of YouTube alt-right exposure is that he's got to make money and that it's actually more important than going to school and learning. And so I think we're depriving our kids of their innocence and their purity and all the benefits of actually learning. And then it also forces our kids to feel like they need this, they need to do that. So the more we can spark that creativity that you're sparking, but it's not like kids need to buy more or have more. I just think it's something that we need to check a little bit more.
Well, I oftentimes like to say the opposite of artificial intelligence is infinite awareness. And if we're going to be moving into a world where kids and humans, lawyers, doctors, and otherwise are going to have all of this technology, what we really need to be teaching kids is how to solve hard problems. And while there are many problems in the world, which I wish we could all solve right now on the stage, you two are people that have the power to do so. And so I'd love to end the conversation with each one of you sharing what is something that gives you hope about this moment in time?
That we're having this conversation, Jim, that you're hosting this event, that this is an annual event, that you do the work that you do, that you're doing the work that you do and are leading. I'm really proud of our Tech Life Balance series that my office, the First Partners Office, has supported in partnership with California Partners Project, an organization that I co-founded with Olivia Morgan to really anchor children, give them the best start in life, but really address the opportunity to create tech for good. And so we're coming out with a new report in our Tech Life Balance series this next month that really looks at all the kids that we can be socializing kids in California towards or reinforcing that is away from tech, that is to create that balance through our libraries, through reading real books, through our parks, through all the different avenues that will create a little balance, since the pendulum has swung so far towards tech. It's not an anti-tech, but it's to uplift the tech for good, but also realize there's a whole world out there that doesn't require you to be on a device. So that's something that gives me hope. And again, this has been done in partnership with youth and with the private sector. And again, that we're talking about the fact that we know that these technologies are addictive. That we're talking about the fact that we know that there's a tech oligarchy running our country right now that is unchecked and where there's no accountability and transparency. The fact that we recognize that we're actually outing it in a way, like that gives me hope, because that means that something can change because we know something's wrong. So that gives me hope. Yes, I think we should applaud that.
Round of applause. And Bill, do you want to just round us out?
Sure. Yeah, a couple things I'd offer to share that I think give some hope in this moment. One, I think similar to first partner Newsom's comments, I think that people are aware more than ever that there are different choices they can make and may need to make, right? And I think that's true with young people. I think it's true with parents. It's true with educators, and increasingly true with policymakers, because there's broad support for these things. Like some of the research this morning that Common Sense Media put out, around 80% plus of people think that these things need to be reined in on social media, right? So I think that gives some hope. I think the second thing I'd offer is that, for the last 10 or 15 years, there's been so much discussion around like the fragmentation of content, that there's this democratization of content happening all over the place. And while content gets created in many, many more places by many more people than what would have happened 20 years ago, the distribution of that content has become tremendously consolidated, where it's only a few platforms. And I think in this moment with the, sort of this next generation of AI, and with consumers being more aware they need to make a different choice, I think there's a moment for those choices to be more on display. And I think in this moment where on the one hand you could look and say, okay, it's a fearful moment because maybe some platforms are going to make the choice to just let it all rip. Well, that actually puts the choice even more on display. And if you go back to a prior media world that many of us would have grown up with, where you chose what channel to watch. Well, you could watch a channel that was going to show you salacious content. You could watch a channel that was going to show you things that would have been a guilty pleasure. But you could also put it on a channel that you knew, if it was network TV before 9 p.m., you knew it was going to be okay with your family. And I think we're in a moment where hopefully not only are consumers aware more and more that they maybe should make a different choice, I think some of the new technology hopefully allows a moment where there can be more actual choices, not just in who's creating the content, but who's distributing that content and deciding, okay, what are the kinds of content that should elevate or not elevate? And so, that's what we're focused on, is like, how do we give consumers a different choice where the AI is tuned for positivity, is tuned for their well-being, and we're seeing that consumers are actually making that choice. And I hope we're not the only one. I hope others follow suit.
Well, thank you both for being on the bright side of history and for making the choices for the next generation rooted in trust, transparency, and more importantly, their well-being.